Right.
Welcome to Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Hello, Keith. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Very good. It's good to have you back. I missed you the last time or two.
Well, life gets in the way. I think about a month ago, I had a shoot, and I
Yeah.
still work and shoot, and I had something on the weekend, and
Right.
it was in Knoxville. It was all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and then a couple of weeks ago, I had to have surgery on the top of my noggin. My wife, it was funny. She says when they go in there, check and make sure you still got a brain, because sometimes you don't act like it.
Oh
I
my.
said, "Thank you, my dear. I love you
Oh
too."
yeah,
So,
Dana. Thank you.
I know, but anyway, it's all good now, and I'm
Good.
back, and school's out, so I got a few more weeks of summer left.
Yeah, and we're having a good summer. Things are
Oh,
looking good.
oh yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, today is the Lavender Festival up at Jackson Square.
Yep,
So Oak Ridge is buzzing today.
it is. It absolutely is.
I'm
All
headed
right.
up that way as soon as we get through here.
Okay, well, good. Well, why don't you introduce our guest?
Oh, I'd love to. I've got Dennis Aslinger with us today as a guest. Dennis is the great grandson of the prophet of Oak Ridge, the John Hendricks. And if I can, Dennis, I'm going to show your book. If I can find the share screen here and get it up. Well,
I've got a copy here in case you wanted to show the.
let's just do that
Yeah,
because
that's good.
I didn't put it up like I should have, so we won't do that. All right. Go ahead and share your screen. Dennis, there you go. That's the Prophet of Oak Ridge Revealed.
Hmm.
And Dennis has just published that book. And it talks about John Hendricks in a way that I know has never been done before. There are details in there that I did not know, and I tell this story constantly. We had Bill Lepp here last weekend telling it at the Flatwater Tales Festival, and I introduced Dennis and Bill. And of course, I had given Bill one of Dennis's books a few weeks ago, so he was able to use some of that information and put it into the story. Then I had Bill to come on the Oracle class of more stories from the Secret City and talk about how he did his research and how he built that story. And then Dennis has agreed to be a guest for me this coming Monday
Oh,
on the Oracle class. So we're making the most out of Dennis and Bill and the John Hendricks story.
and
Thought it would be good if we got it on here as well. Go
Dennis,
ahead.
this is what I'm anxious to hear this, because I know Ray's told the story way more times than I have, and I've told it in documentary form. I just want to know what we screwed up on. So what have we been getting wrong the whole time? So I'm anxious to hear this.
Well, you're going to get the true facts because
All
he
right,
has
good.
done real research on it,
All
a
right,
whole lot more than either you or I have ever done or ever will do on.
sure.
Well, I
Okay.
used your columns quite a bit, Ray, from
Okay.
2006
Yeah.
for quoting James Braden,
Yeah.
and and then layered on top of that, and then worked from there. Uh, I thought as part of this presentation today, I would review for anybody that's not familiar uh, with some of the story of John Hendricks, his background, and then his prophecies, predictions, um, and then lastly get into the what I call the untold story, the stuff that I've turned up recently that you guys or nobody was familiar with,
Right.
and then we could, like I said, answer questions if you have any as we go along.
Sure.
So I called it. I called the book "The Prophet of Oak Ridge Revisited" because because I did find that new information, I didn't want to do just a retelling. I also wanted to correct things that were wrong in some of the older stuff that were published. You know, like the things were published that said John died in 1903, which is clearly wrong.
Right.
Not being judgmental of any previous writers, but just trying to set the story straight and then try to provide a timeline for when things actually happened. So, John Hendricks, my great grandfather, as you mentioned, and I learned about him from my grandmother, Linda Hendricks, back in the 1960s and 1970s. Spent quite a bit of time with my grandmother. She had some surgery, and my mom wanted somebody to stay with her, and so I would walk out to her house every night, spend the night with her, get up at 6 in the morning, go home, get ready for school, and all those evenings we spent together, she would tell me about John Hendricks. And back then, there was only one book that mentioned John Hendricks, and there were only a few newspaper articles from the 1940s, which she had never seen any of that, and I was not aware they even existed. And so they weren't accessible to me. So everything I knew was family oral history. So beginning in the mid 1980s, I started collecting genealogical and family history information, and done that for 4 decades. I wasn't researching John Hendricks per se. I was researching all my family lines and all my wife's family lines. And you know, I loved to learn the history, not just you know, names and dates. But the latest discoveries that I made showed that John had been a violent young man, and strongly suggested he had abused his wife. Now, these conclusions in no way diminish his prophecy. I think, on the contrary, they're integral to his journey of spiritual healing and redemption. And without them, there would have been no prophecy to begin with. Some of the basics about John Hendricks was his parents, Luke and Jane Wallace Hendricks, left Morgan County, moved to Anderson County in mid 1865. And for those watching, any counties I mentioned are in Tennessee, unless noted. I think the Hendricks family may have been driven out of Morgan County because John's uncle, Alfred Wallace, was a Confederate soldier, and the vast majority of their neighbors were Unionists. Luke Hendricks had owned 100 acres in Morgan County, and he sold it right before they moved. As far as I can tell, he never owned land again. So they may have had some financial issues as well from the war. So John was born in Anderson County on November 9th, 1865. His mother and several siblings apparently died in the 1870s. We don't know what the cause of their deaths were or where they're buried. They just disappear from the records. Can't find anything on them. Later, John married Julia Ann Griffith in Anderson County in 1888. Julia was from Morgan County as well, and she was John's second cousin. That's something that I haven't seen ever mentioned in print. They were both great grandchildren of Garrett Hendricks, who settled on Beaver Creek in the Carnes area of Knox County about 1794. John and Julia had 5 children together and lived near present-day Bull Run Steam Plant. And in about 1897, John disciplined the second youngest child, Ethel Perigold, when she was sick, supposedly with diphtheria, and she died soon after. And for decades, it was claimed that there were 4 children and that Ethel was the youngest, but in fact, there was a younger daughter named Cassie.
Dennis, do you have this on your PowerPoint? You want to share that so people can see what you're talking from?
It's what I just said. Can you
Yeah,
see
well, I thought you had your presentation you were going to put up.
Well, I have it on my screen.
Yeah, but you're not sharing it with us. If you'll just share your screen on the Zoom, then we can see what you're looking at.
Yeah, we can see what you're looking at.
I'm sorry. I thought I was doing that already.
That's
No,
okay.
that's okay, but we just wanted to get it up.
Let's see.
Down at the bottom, you'll see share screen. It's green.
Let me collapse this. I'm sorry. I thought I was
Oh,
doing
no,
that already.
That's okay. We'll get it.
It's all right.
There you're coming up now. Now we got it.
There
Now,
you go.
just go ahead and if you want to, hit the presentation so that it'll go full screen.
Go full screen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We'll get the most of it from here on out.
Yeah.
Then. So anyway, I discovered that there was this extra daughter, Cassie, a few years back. I don't remember what year it was, Ray, but I shared it with you when I found it.
Yeah.
That Julia Hendricks had moved in with her mother in Morgan County, and they were listed as Griffith instead of Hendricks.
Mm-hmm.
And I found Cassie, and so Julia blamed John for the baby Ethel's death and left him, taking the other children with her. Now, most of the narratives from the past said she just took the children and went to Arkansas.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that simple. They first moved to Morgan County and stayed with Julia's mother. So probably from 1898 or so until her divorce from John became final. After the divorce, she did move to Arkansas and took her children where John could not find her, and he never got to see his children again. So that was important to him, his children, and so I think that's what kind of drove him over the edge.
Yeah.
In grieving for the loss of his family, his behavior became erratic, and he was confined to the Anderson County Poor Farm in the building known as the Insane Asylum. Now, I don't believe that John was insane or even mentally ill, but I do believe that he had a mental break, a little bit of a mental breakdown there. And while he was confined, I think he kind of realized he was responsible for the situation he was in, kind of like the prodigal son. Anyway, there's no record of how or when exactly he was committed to the farm, but he escaped in the spring of 1901 and later became ultra religious and began making prophecies. He later married Martha Jane Whitehead Gregory in July 1908, a few months after they had bought adjoining properties in the area of Robertsville in Anderson County known as the Flatwoods. And of course, today that's Hendricks Creek subdivision.
Right.
Martha moved from Blount County after divorcing her first husband for infidelity and abandonment. She had 5 minor children and 2 married daughters, one of whom moved along with her, and that would have been Paralee Raby. John and Martha had 1 child together, Curtis Allen Hendricks, born in September 1909, and he was my grandfather.
Got it.
If then I move on and talk about John's major prophecies, and whether they're major or minor, that was just my rating, my thoughts about it. Somebody else might have a different opinion about whether something's major or minor, but he made his first prophecy after escaping from Anderson County Poor Farm. When the superintendent saw him outside the fence, John said, "Don't come after me. This place is evil, and God will burn it down within a month." And that's the version my grandmother told me. The building on the Poor Farm, known as the Insane Asylum, excuse me, had iron cages for those confined there. It was struck by lightning and burned in the spring of 1901. John placed a row of 8 stones in front of his home and said the Lord told him to put them there to smite his enemies. An alternative account says that in addition to the stones, he placed a sign in the yard that said, "Smite thine enemies." So the stones and possibly the sign were said to be responsible for the Poor Farm commissioners declining to apprehend John a second time. Now, this part,
Dennis, let me ask you a question. Do we know? You said that the insane asylum had iron cages.
yes, sir.
So do we know if people escaped from there during by the fire, or were they burned? Do we know that?
I don't think that they were normally occupied,
Okay.
probably. If someone had died in the fire, they would have mentioned it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the court record includes a list of everything that burned up that was stored in that building when it burned.
Okay.
And I think that's in the book.
Okay.
Well, that's a good detail. That makes sense that if there wasn't anybody in there often, that there wouldn't have been any death. And I agree, if it had been deaths, it would have been in the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't. He didn't escape from the iron cage. I think he was outside in a fenced area, and he dug out under the fence, because that's what my grandmother said. He dug out.
Oh,
You know.
Okay, very good.
Another major prophecy was that he predicted L&N would build a rail line from Dossett through the Black Oak Ridge and Elza to Knox County. And this line was built between May 1902 and April 1905. He said the tunnel through the ridge would pass under the Butcher Spring and sink it. He predicted the route of the rail line, and he specified the location of the railway bridge over the Clinch River.
Keith, those are all new prophecies to me. I don't use those in the story.
yeah.
And did not know about them. These are examples of what Dennis has turned up that
Mm-hmm.
I had no clue about.
So then we come to the big one, what I call his prophetic vision. While he was looking up into the heavens one day, he heard a voice as loud and as sharp as thunder telling him to sleep on the ground for 40 nights, and he would be shown the future of this land, or his home area. And he did so, and sometime later he had the prophetic vision. And so this is the one that we all know about. He said Bear Creek Valley someday will be filled with great buildings and factories, and will help toward winning the greatest war that ever will be. Big engines will dig big ditches, and thousands of people will be running to and fro. They will be building things, and there will be great noise and confusion, and the earth will shake. I've seen it, it's coming. There will be a city on Black Oak Ridge, and the center of authority will be on a spot that is middle way between Severe Tadlock's farm and Joe Pyatt's place. L&N will build a rail spur from Elza to Scarborough. And John went so far as to notch trees and mark the route of the rail spur and the future roads and the location of the center of authority. Now, Bert Vincent was a newspaper columnist, and he quoted Paralee Raby, John's stepdaughter, in his August the 14th, 1946 strolling column in the News Sentinel, Knoxville News Sentinel, as saying that everything that had been written about her stepfather was so, and that everything that he prophesied had taken place. Wow. Now, Bert Vincent had gone looking for Martha Jane Hendricks, and he went to where he was told that she lived, but she had died the previous autumn, and he got to meet Paralee instead. Another facet of John Hendricks's major prophecies, which were the railroad spur, the city of Oak Ridge, and the construction of Y-12 in the Bear Creek Valley, nobody has ever noted this, is that they all took place within 3 miles of his home. And in the book, I mentioned that he never said anything about X10 or K25 or any of the other things that happen outside that radius. And some of his minor prophecies, he was plowing. He and his stepson Murray Gregory were plowing one day, and Murray complained about the large limestone rocks in the field. And John told him not to worry about those rocks. One day they'd be ground up to make lime, and the rocks were ground up for building material when Oak Ridge was built. John predicted one day that airplanes would carry passengers and freight. And people, some people have written that, well, they didn't have airplanes when he was alive, or, when he made his predictions and whatever. But actually, they did have airplanes from 1903 or one. I forget the year the Wright brothers first flew, but he died in 1915. So they had planes, but they were all made of wood and fabric at the time. And people didn't see a practical use for flight. He predicted it'd carry passengers and freight, so that certainly wasn't taking place during his lifetime. One account said that John claimed to have spent 3 weeks in paradise, and he flew there in a white metal airplane, 200 feet with 200-foot long wings. And as I said, the planes then were wood and fabric, so a metal airplane would have been a pretty novel concept for the time. Makes the planes much heavier, and they didn't have engines that could get one off the ground. John named the people around him that would be alive to see his vision fulfill. That would be the Manhattan Project. And he named the people who would not be alive, which including himself. Now, I've never seen.
Dennis, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the one where he talked about John spent 3 weeks in paradise.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure, Ray, how many conspiracy theorists we have that watch our podcast, but that is fodder for aliens right there, isn't it? I mean, that's a conspiracy theory waiting to be born about John Hendricks and
aliens.
And aliens. So, which is a very popular thing to talk about these days. So,
I briefly mentioned that in the book, that it sounded like an alien abduction.
Oh,
but,
there, yeah.
I think that that's just another one of his visions that or maybe he as part of the vision, he's like seeing the plane or being in the plane, and he's seeing this happen. He's basically describing a jet airliner.
Yeah, sure.
That's right.
Because that's about the wingspan of a modern jetliner.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good for follow-up, Keith. We'll do something with that later.
All right, sounds good.
Now, that story was not one that I ever heard from my grandmother. I'll say that. I don't know. I learned about that from these. It may have been from your column, Ray. I don't remember.
I don't remember either. But anyway, from your research, not from your grandmother.
Right.
Yeah.
So the untold story, I think I skipped the slide there. This is where it gets serious. In the spring of 1887, John Hendricks shot and killed a man named John Gallagher in Anderson County near Cobb's Ferry, very near the present-day Solway Bridge. Now, Gallagher, it was said, was walking home to Scarborough after visiting Hedgecock's store on the Knox County-Loudoun County line. Now, I have a map here that I will share with you. This is an excellent map. It's from 1895, and it's very detailed on Knox County. Cobb's Ferry is up here near the top in the middle.
We can't see the map.
You can't see it?
No, you'll have to stop your share and then reshare your screen. Well, that'd be good. We'd like to see that map, so let's do it. You've got it on one other window.
Yeah.
So just stop the share and then share again and click on that map.
Yeah.
Ray, I'm sorry, I can't find the share.
Up the top, look up there where it says up the top, you'll see stop share.
Okay, stop share.
All right, now go down and hit share screen on the bottom. And it'll give you some options. When that comes up, click on the map.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, click on the map. Ah, you got it. Very good. We're gonna make an expert out of you.
Yeah, I'm a little slow. I'm a slow
Oh,
learner.
no, you're doing fine. Now
Put me
we
on
can
the
see the map.
We've been doing this 4 years and we're just now figuring it out. So don't worry about it, Dennis.
That's right.
So up at the top here near the middle, you'll see Cobb's Ferry. On a modern day map, maybe Google Maps, you can zoom in. It'll show Cobb's Shoals right in here.
Okay.
And this is just the southwest of present day Solway Bridge, which is about right here where my cursor is.
Okay.
Now, I've gone and researched in censuses to double check to see anybody in this area that were the Lee family, because John and his father both lived with his sister Phoebe Lee and her husband Clisby Lee. And this map has the names of people and where they live. And so here where my cursor at, near the bottom in the middle is C. Lee. And
Right.
he's the only person by the name with surname Lee that start with his first name started with a C. So that was where they lived. And of course, Phoebe is buried somewhere very near here.
Now, where is that present day?
Well, it's somewhere right there in Solway. The
Okay.
roads don't look the same.
Okay.
This is the Solway area.
All right.
This green is Hardin Valley. It's District 9 of Knox County.
Okay.
Now, the store that Mr. Gallagher had visited is located way down here on the Loudoun County line, right at the river. And it was run by Willis Edward Hedgecock. And I was just delighted to see that detail because Mr. Hedgecock was my wife's third great grandfather.
Okay.
And he was a captain in the Union Army. He was at the Battle of Nashville. His son Thomas Hedgecock was also there, but he was very sick in the hospital. As you know, most soldiers from the war died of disease instead of bullets.
Right.
So it's a kind of a miracle he survived. And of course, Thomas is my wife's second great grandfather. So at any rate, Mr. Gallagher had come from Anderson County, crossed the river, walked all the way down to that store, and then walked back, crossed the river again at the ferry, and then he encountered John Hendricks on the Anderson County side of the river.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my slides.
Okay. There you go. We got you back now.
Okay, so Mr. Gallagher was a Confederate veteran of the Civil War, and he had been injured at the Battle of Chickamauga, which was the second bloodiest battle of the Civil War. He'd been in the war for 3 years, and I think my personal opinion is he probably had PTSD that could have made him violent, and he was reputed to be a bully, and he had a history with the Hendricks family. Newspaper reports from the time of the trial or leading up to the trial said that John Hendricks had sworn as a youth to kill Gallagher when he came of age. So what I believe is that John Hendricks saw Gallagher go into the store, cross the river, and waited for him to come back because he knew that Gallagher would, make a scene and threaten him. And so when Gallagher did come back, the reports say that he told John Hendricks to go back, get away from him, go back across the river, and John refused. So Gallagher set down his belongings, came back to where John was, and began beating him with a large stick. It's called a G stick. is a piece of wood with a ring at each end they use to train animals with. They connect it to the horse collar on the hame ring, they call it, and they'd use a trained animal to train a new animal that hadn't been broken to plowing or pulling a wagon. Anyway, John Hendricks killed him with 2 shots from a pistol, which I think was probably a Derringer since it would be easy to conceal. The the plan to knock off Mr. Gallagher probably wouldn't work if he saw a pistol on his hip or something, you know. So
Yeah.
I think it was something small that he had in his pocket. So, as is usually the case, or always the case, you have a preliminary hearing for a killing or something like that. So John had to appear before the local justice of the peace in Anderson County, and he was represented at this hearing by Willis E. Hedgecock, who was the justice of the peace for the 9th District of Knox County, that whole large area that I showed you on the map.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have a huge population back then like it does now, but he was a judge basically. So I thought it was remarkable that John was represented at this hearing by the local judge. I don't know what to make of that, but the newspaper reports indicated that the people that crowded in to see this preliminary hearing were all pro John Hendricks. So that led me to believe that they didn't like Mr. Gallagher very much.
Okay.
And then John, yes.
No, go ahead.
And so when John had his trial, he was represented by some prominent attorneys, E.F. Minot of Knoxville and Jim Burnett of Clinton. And in the book I discussed, you know, John was poor. He couldn't afford a lawyer. And I'm sure he couldn't afford bail either. They had a bail hearing and they were going to let him out on bail, but I'm pretty sure he had to sit in jail until the trial. And as I said, John lived with his sister, Phoebe Lee, and her family, at least in the 1880 census. And this killing occurred in 1887, but he probably was still there with them at that time. So John pleaded self-defense, and he was found innocent in October 1887. The newspaper reports the court records don't really give much detail. They just say what happened, you know, guilty or not. But the court record said that the key thing was that Gallagher had set down his belongings and had walked some distance back to Hendricks before he started beating him. And Hendricks had bruising all over his arms from the stick. So that's how he avoided jail. So 6 months after the trial, John married Julia Griffith. And they apparently had a troubled marriage because after the small daughter died, Julia filed for divorce in Morgan County. She filed before July 1898. I don't know exactly when, but it listed the first record I found showed she was making some change to her complaint that was already existing. So it may not have been long, but it was July when it happened, the change. The divorce became final on July the 5th, 1900. The judge found that proof amply sustains the allegations of the petitioner, which would have been Julia, and that the defendant, John Hendricks, is guilty of the wrongs and injuries alleged in the petition. Unfortunately, the petition and testimony were not preserved. We don't know what the wrongs were or the injuries that she claimed. but the judge said it was amply proven, basically. He further found that the defendant, John Hendricks, is not the proper person to have care and control of minor children. So the judge gave his wife a divorce and took away his children in one fell swoop. Now, one of the things that, one of the papers that was in the court record was she notified the court that John Hendricks was now a resident of Morgan County. So he had obviously followed her back up there. He found out where she was at, I guess, because of the court case. So the killing of John Gallagher showed that John Hendricks could be violent, and in being found of the guilty of wrongs and injuries charged by Julia, being divorced and losing custody of his children strongly implies that Julia was a battered wife. Their baby may have died of diphtheria, but it's possible that John shook the crying baby in frustration without knowing that it was dangerous. I don't think for a minute he would have killed the baby. But whatever he did, Julia believed that it killed her child. This is an item that I've started trying to research, is where does this information come from on the diphtheria, the age of the baby's name. The earliest record I've found of that is the 1986 article in the Oak Ridger by Marjorie Parsley. The article said that she was researching for a John Hendricks descendant in Arkansas, and it did not name who that person was. But I think that Marjorie Parsley got that information from the person in Arkansas. I have a contact in Arkansas, and I've asked her the question, and she's going to be looking for it. But I don't know if there'll be any luck there since it's been so long ago. But I think that information actually came from one of Julia's children or grandchildren. Julia must have been terrified of John Hendricks. She moved hundreds of miles away to Arkansas, where she had no friends, family, or support system. Her 4 children remaining ranged in age from 4 to 11 years old, and they probably traveled by rail, catching a Southern Railway train in Lansing in Morgan County, which was about 8 miles from her mother's home. And they traveled, the Southern Railway went to Chattanooga and then west to Memphis, where they would have had to change trains to go further into Arkansas. We don't know exactly where they went in Arkansas when they first arrived, but in 1906, Julia remarried in Calhoun, Arkansas, which is 600 miles from her mother's home in Morgan County. So she was really hiding out from John. So I think that John's guilt and anguish in his erratic behavior led to his confinement on the poor farm. He dug out under the poor farm fence, and he predicted that the insane asylum building with its iron cages would be destroyed by God with fire within a month. Poor farm commissioners reported to, now this is information that had been published before. Poor farm commissioners reported to the Anderson County Quarterly Court on July the 1st, 1901, that the insane asylum building had been struck by lightning and consumed by fire in the previous quarter, which would have been April through June 1901. So the John Hendricks story is a story of contrition and redemption. I think that he had a religious conversion during his confinement, because the people that knew John after his confinement, particularly Martha Jane, his second wife, never indicated that he was a violent man, and he had gained the reputation of a devout and ultra-religious man. Excuse me. So then I tried to set up a timeline to determine when these things actually happened. And so I don't think it would be credible to me that he made predictions and prophecies before his divorce. So That's where I started with the timeline. Most people said that he started making these predictions around the turn of the 20th century, and that's generally accurate, but I tried to refine it a bit. So assuming his 30-day time frame for burning of the asylum building was accurate, his first prediction would have been made between March 1st and May 1st, 1901. And then the lightning strike would have been between April 1st and June 30th, 1901. James Braden, who was quoted in the 1944 newspaper articles, said that the L&N line that John predicted would be built had been built 18 months after his death. And John died on June the 2nd, 1915, so his statement would place construction in 1917. However, Mr. Braden's sequence of events was incorrect by a wide margin because, as we mentioned before, the rail line was completed in 1905, about 10 years before John died. One thing Mr. Braden did indicate was that John Hendricks was married when the voice spoke and told him to sleep on the ground for 40 nights. Now, he didn't need any dates to, nail that down. I mean, it's like, okay, his wife, he quoted the wife. So that had to be Martha Jane. And of course, if it was Martha Jane, it was as his wife, then it had to be after July 1908 when they were married. And so I would think that John probably slept on the ground promptly after hearing the voice. I think I would if I was following directions from on high. Mr. Braden said that John had the prophetic vision a couple of months after sleeping on the ground when he overheated while making hay. I looked into the weather records for the time between when John was married and before he died, or up until he died. And there was no freezing weather anytime near haymaking season in those years. So the statement, a couple of months, had to be off. It had been several months. So we couldn't really nail anything down there. But the earliest date that's feasible to me for having the prophetic vision was spring, summer 1909. And the latest date would be spring, summer 1914. And he was too gravely ill by 1915 to work in the hayfield. So that's how I determined, the end points for when that could have occurred. None of his other predictions included any datable information. So doing timeline was not real fruitful, but I did what I could with it.
Yeah, I understand.
In the book, we talk about the nature of prophecy and whether there's a speaker in the vision, or if the person making the prophecy was asleep or awake. John Hendricks did not say if he was asleep or awake. He had the vision. He didn't say there was a speaker in the vision, but I believe if there had been one, that he would have quoted the speaker, because he was very excited when he had these visions and told everybody that he could get to listen. So while John was very religious, his prophecy was not religious in nature. There's no religion involved in it. There's no moral lessons, no repent or else. He was said to have prayed about the future of his home. And so his vision was a very specific answer to his prayer, because the events described in the visions and predictions all occurred within 3 miles of his home. Now, if somebody was making this up after the fact, you would think that they would mention X-10 and K-25. They would have mentioned World War II, and we were fighting whoever, Germans and Japanese. and all this stuff. But no, there's none of that in this. So then I moved on to talk a little bit about John's legacy. His prophecies were not documented during his lifetime, and most people, or many people, take the position that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. But I think that even if John had written about his visions, there would still be skeptics saying that the writings were fake. They were written later. After my book was published, it was self-published, by the way. A new article titled "Prophet of Oppenheimer's Atomic Bomb" by Brett Taylor appeared in the Skeptical Inquirer, the magazine for science and reason, a bi-monthly American general audience magazine published by the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The very first sentence says, "Did a hillbilly prophet foretell the development of the atomic bomb?" I will note that I went through that article and I wrote a refutation, practically line by line, pointing out all the errors and providing evidence. I sent it to him, but I've received no response.
I'm not surprised.
The article quotes a book that includes a list of several notable people supposedly related to Hendricks, with no details, documentation, or citation. I was aware of the book. I did not buy it. I didn't trust it. But it listed several, had a president and several other prominent people. And so I contacted the author of the book. I asked where the source of these fantastical additions to my family tree came from, and was told that the information was received from another person. And I noted that many amateur genealogists fabricate fabulous family trees claiming kin to the rich and famous, and that the source had provided information that was untrue. And they didn't want to hear that. They said they just didn't want to argue about it.
Of course not.
So, well, I don't know identifying anybody, but
I
Ray probably knows.
Yeah, that's okay. I think you're doing proper now. What you're doing is fine.
Anyway, the Skeptical Inquirer article stated, "Whatever credibility the Hendricks story has rests on details of the location of the city and the railroad. The idea that Hendricks revealed exact details comes from close friends and family members who told the story years after Hendricks died. Given the tendency to misremember details, we can imagine these people embroidering Hendricks's visions with specific details. This would certainly be a comfort to any members of the Hendricks family, related as they were to a man who was laughingly dismissed as a crackpot and even institutionalized for a brief time." Well, no.
All right.
Maybe the whole staff has a brain between them.
Yeah, right.
These are probably the kinds of it just these are the kind of people that probably think that the moon landing was faked. It's that kind of thing. So
Well, they're skeptical.
Yeah, skeptical is right.
What a way to live life.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
the article, excuse me.
It's all right.
The article quotes Bert Vincent often, and Bert Vincent misquoted James Braden often. And James Braden was sometimes wrong about a few things. So he used Bert Vincent quite a bit in this article.
Okay.
Bert Vincent visited people and asked questions as journalists do, but his column was more humorous entertainment than serious journalism. So I would not use him as a primary source.
I think it's worthy to note that your skeptical reviewer doesn't evidently use Ray Smith's articles. That's probably because he didn't like what I said.
When the government agents moving on to
Yeah.
away from that article, when the government agents began serving notices that residents only had a few weeks to vacate their property, my great grandmother, Martha Jane Hendricks, met my grandmother, Linda Hendricks, at the spring near their home and said, "Looks like old John Hendricks was right."
How about that?
My grandmother,
Yeah.
she would hate nothing more than a liar, and she'd die before she'd tell a lie about something like that. Try to,
Yeah.
you know, why would she lie to support her long dead father-in-law? You know.
Yeah.
I understand.
Anyway, the government condemned 59,000 acres in Anderson and Roane counties in November 1942. Martha Jane Hendricks and the Kurt Hendricks family were among the approximately 3,000 people displaced. And the communities of Elza, Robertsville, Scarborough, and Wheat were depopulated and ceased to exist. Now, Kurt Hendricks, my grandfather, moved his family to Union County, but he was able to find work in Oak Ridge and then had to live away from his family. And he stayed in Guthrie Hall Dormitory, which was in West Village over near Weatherford Funeral Home today. Kurt wrote a letter to his mother, Martha Jane Hendricks, postmarked March 24th, 1944. And referring to Oak Ridge, he said, "My dad said that that place would be builded, and they said he was crazy." Who was crazy? So you can see that at that point, my grandfather in March of 44, this was before it's ever was published in any paper, mm-hmm. was talking about how people said his father was crazy and that he had predicted the city of Oak Ridge. So since he worked in Oak Ridge, Kurt was able to visit Hendricks' home place in his free time. And he wrote a poignant, undated letter to his mother about the visit. The details of this letter have never been published, and the following quote is shared here for the first time. I don't think this is in the book. He told his mother, "Your apple trees look fine. They have apples on them as big as partridge eggs, and there are plenty of them. The roses are in full bloom and very pretty, and things look full of life and promise. I pulled the weeds and briars off my daddy's grave and made 2 bouquets of roses and put them on his grave. I wonder if he has any way of knowing that I did so." And shortly after that, Kurt was murdered by 2 Union County neighbors on July the 9th, 1944. My mother was 5 years old. My grandmother was pregnant with their last child and didn't even know it yet. She moved the family back to Anderson County, which is where I grew up, right after he was killed. And she raised 8 children by herself. So the scarcity of primary source materials naturally have contributed to some inaccuracies in the John Hendricks story over time, mainly with dates. Early articles were based on 3-decade-old memories, and some obvious errors, such as John Hendricks' date of death, were propagated until within the last decade or two. Things started getting, we started making corrections over time. Ray, I'm sure you corrected the death date and things in your article. And so I tried to straighten out the railroad timing.
Yeah.
So it's important to establish the facts, because skeptics will seize on inconsistencies, particularly when the subject is prophecy, which many disbelieve on principle. And my book attempts to identify the errors, as I said, without being critical of the writers who depended upon the information available at the time. Like I said, when I was learning about the John Hendricks prophecy, I didn't have internet. I didn't have access to the library with the Oak Ridge storybook by Mr. Robinson. I didn't know about the 1944 newspaper. My grandmother had a fourth grade education, so she was not a big reader, you know. My family didn't have a newspaper. We didn't have telephones until I was out of high school. So we just do not have the access that we have today with the internet and all that. So my book compiles all the predictions and prophecies and corrects errors from other sources, documents previously unknown records, establishes time frame for predictions and prophecies, provides citations and a bibliography, and also includes chapters on genealogy and John's son Kurt. A lot of people get stuck on the genealogy chapter, but that's more for family than anything else.
Right.
Anybody that's interested,
Yeah.
nothing to do with the prophecy.
Right.
And new details might continue to emerge. Just recently, I was made aware of some old Anderson County Justice of the Peace papers in possession of the Oak Ridge Public Library, and Mike Stello helped me with that. The papers include a promissory note dated June 1887 from E. Gallagher. It's Evan Gallagher, and that was the brother of John Gallagher, the man that was killed, acknowledging that he owed $85 of a $100 debt to G.L. Burke for services rendered in prosecuting John Hendricks for the murder of John Gallagher. Papers also include a second note from E. Gallagher for $50 to J.A. Fowler in October 1887 for the same case. And Mr. Burke was a Roane County attorney, and Fowler was an Anderson County attorney. Fowler later moved to Knox County and was an attorney there, became Knox County mayor and assistant U.S. attorney. And both Burke and Fowler were mentioned in newspaper reports as representing the state during John's trial. I don't know why the private citizen would be hiring lawyers to be part of the prosecution, which is normally provided by the state, but he put up his own money trying to help convict John Hendricks, but it didn't work.
Yeah. Wow.
That was the end of the slide presentation.
That's a whole lot of details that had not previously been available on the history of John Hendricks. A much fuller account than has been available prior to this. Keith, any questions you have for Dennis?
No, I mean, it's just, well, yes. How can someone get the book?
Yeah, good.
There are probably still some copies available at the museums in Oak Ridge.
Okay.
And they are also available on Amazon.
Okay. And the name of the book again?
The name of the book is The Prophet of Oak Ridge Revealed.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
very good.
There you go.
And I chose the cover photo as a railroad purposely because of two of his predictions involved the railroad. One, the line built through Black Oak Ridge and Elza and going on to Knox County. And then the other prediction was the spur line from Elza on over to Scarborough.
Right.
So I thought that was appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thanks a lot for bringing this detail out for our audience to understand better about the details of John Hendricks' story that never get told. I don't include them in mine. We focus on just the prophecies. Of course,
yeah, I never would have thought that I would write a book, but all the older generation's gone, and I thought if not me, who, and if not when,
Exactly.
if not now, when.
Exactly.
And so I just kind of decided to get started on it, and it's worked its way out.
All right. Well, very good. Well, we appreciate it, Dennis. Thank you so much. And folks, look on Amazon for the book, or go to one of our museums in Oak Ridge and find it. Ray, who do we have coming up next?
Well, we have Greg Crosby coming up next. He toured Oak Ridge some months ago, and I met him and became intrigued with what he has done. He's a mental therapist, and he's focused on the impact that cell phone addiction, it may be having primarily on young people, but it may be affecting all of us.
We
And
may find out we're in trouble.
I know. I
tell you.
got so intrigued with what he was saying that I asked him if he would consider to be interviewed here, and
Right.
he's agreed to do that. I want to take just a minute and do one other real quick thing, if I can bring it up right quick. Well, I don't know that I can. Wonder why that's not up. I'll have to just talk about it.
Okay.
I've got the book that there it is.
You contributed.
Yeah, the book that Lee Redinger wrote, Critical Connections, is coming out now. It's available on Amazon, and we're going to have some events here in Oak Ridge at the library and at the museum, American Museum of Science and Energy. And we will promote the book, obviously. It's available on Amazon in a pre-order status now.
And
So
we did a show on that. It's about the relationship between Oak Ridge and University of Tennessee. Is that correct?
Right. It is. And that we'll be hearing more about that as we get closer, probably in August and September timeframe. Okay. But at any rate, we look forward to taking a little different twist next time. And Dennis, we really do appreciate you being with us and bringing us up information that we just didn't have available to us. Thank you for all of your diligent research that went into that.
You're very welcome, sir.
All right. All right. Ray, Dennis, folks, thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another Hidden History.